Young Charlie by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
Roman Polanski wandered through the house, touching things that should have seemed familiar, but now appeared as apparitional features of a waking dream that wouldn't end. Sunday, August 17, 1969, was the first time he'd been to the house on Cielo Drive since the murders 8 days earlier. For a long time, he looked down at the bed he'd shared with his pregnant wife. The pillows were still bunched at the center, something Sharon did when he was away, hugging him in spirit as she drifted off to sleep. In the living room, a large red stain showed where she'd died, lying on her side with nothing to comfort her. The filmmaker could imagine the blade driving into her body again and again until there was nothing left of her and the son inside her but ravaged flesh. "Why?" he muttered as he walked around the house slowly. "Why? Why?" Following the director were a writer and photographer from Life magazine, there to document his return. Along with them was Peter Hurkos, a self-styled psychic hired by friends of Jay Sebring on the belief that his readings might aid the police in their search for the killers. He would later inform the press that 3 men were responsible for the carnage. They were friends of Sharon and had ingested massive doses of LSD, which had turned them into frenzied homicidal maniacs. The murders took place during a black magic ceremony known as Guna Guna. Though police knew better than to take Hurkos' gibberish seriously, the press showed little restraint. They described details derived entirely from rumor and fevered speculation. That the house was the site of frequent orgies and drug parties, that Sharon dabbled in the dark arts, that Polanski was somehow involved in the killings.
The house is open now. The police has released it. And you can go and see the orgy place. You will see a lot of blood all over the place. Baby clothes. And that's all. I'm sorry for...
Outraged at the macabre fantasies foisted on the public by an out-of-control media, the director called a press conference on August 19th to deny the lurid allegations. Some present felt Polanski's grief-stricken words were undermined by the exclusive he'd just given Life magazine, complete with photo spread of the death house. From Wondery, I'm Tracy Pattin with Stephen Lang. Today, Hollywood and Crime presents Young Charlie. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend you go back and listen to the previous episode. We'll be waiting for you. Today's episode, Crazy Charlie. Here's my co-host, Stephen Lang.
February 1951. 3 16-year-olds drive down a road outside Beaver, Utah, when one of them points through the windshield at something up ahead. By the time they realize it's a roadblock, it's too late. Hanging a quick U-turn will have the cops on their tail in no time. The only thing to do is pull over and hope for the best. And for a moment, it seems luck is on their side. Turns out the cops are looking for an adult robbery suspect, not 3 teenage reformatory runaways. But wouldn't you know it, they run a check on the plates anyway. Charlie sighs and gives that little smile of his. He knows what they're going to find. Since breaking out of the Indiana school for boys with Wiley Centeny and Orrin Rust, hot-wiring cars has been their preferred mode of getting around. Burglarizing gas stations provided the cash for what they hoped would be a trip to California, at least until now. Looks like Beaver, Utah is about as far as they're going to get. Sitting in that car on that cold February day, waiting for the cops to find what they're going to find, Charlie closes his eyes and relaxes into his fate. During his 3 years in Plainfield, he's learned a lifetime's worth of surviving. From the beginning, he knew he wasn't going to make it on his size or strength, but he had a feel for how to play people. Do what you can for those who can help you. Do what you want to those who can't. And when his way with words wasn't enough to protect him from the bigger, tougher kids, he'd start screaming and flapping his arms and bugging his eyes like a crazed, wounded animal. Most of the time it worked and the aggressor would back off. When it didn't, well, it was just in the way of things that the weak submit to the strong. And if it came to rape, as it often did in places like that, well, you let it happen, and you got yourself up and that was the end of it. Something that's done to you isn't you. Shake it off and move on. When the police bring the three boys in, it's not long before they learn they're not going back to Plainfield. Charlie's just fine with that. But when they're sent back to Indiana, it's to face charges of violating the Dyer Act. Taking a stolen car across state lines is a federal crime. And federal time is hard time. Charlie is sent to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C., and he won't be getting out until he turns 21.
On Sunday, August 17th, the Los Angeles Times published an in-depth article on the Tate Killings under the headline, "Anatomy of a Mass Murder in Hollywood." Though little was yet known beyond the facts of who had died and how, or perhaps because the lack of information only fueled the public's interest, Americans consumed everything they could about the grisly crime. Garnering far less interest, but equally inexplicable, were the murders of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, whose story appeared on the same page titled, "L.A. Couple, Victims of Slayer Given Final Rights." The article noted similarities with the Cielo Drive murders only the night before, and that police were working on the assumption that the Los Feliz crime was the work of a copycat killer. What readers that Sunday might have easily missed was a third, much smaller article that appeared beside the Tate story. It detailed a crime of vastly different proportions. Police raid ranch, arrest 26 suspects in auto theft ring. The piece described how the 26 were living in an abandoned Western movie set on an isolated Chatsworth ranch. Sheriff's deputies, believing the group was converting stolen Volkswagens into dune buggies, made the arrests in a daybreak raid Saturday. A cache of weapons was also seized. The owner of the ranch, 80-year-old George Spahn, was described as a nearly blind invalid who lived in a house on the property. Deputies said Spahn knew there were people living on his land, but claimed no knowledge of their activities. He said he was afraid of them. No names of the suspects were mentioned. When all 26 were released days later due to a misdated warrant, the Times did not see fit to report it.
Within 3 months of his incarceration at Washington, D.C.'s Training School for Boys, Charlie's caseworker considers him an institutional politician. Barely literate, with little or no math skills and an IQ only slightly above average, he shows no real interest in learning, except for music. Charlie will sit still and listen in music class. Other than that, what Charlie's good at is knowing how to tune his ways to an audience. He might have few academic skills, but he knows who he can dominate by force and who he needs to charm. And it isn't just the other boys he's figuring out how to play. Psychiatrists, he's finding out, like to put things in their own boxes, have ideas about how people get where they are. Their eyes open just a little wider, their heads tilt forward just a little closer when he talks about his mother and how no one cared a damn about poor Charlie. They want to hear what they already believe, is what Charlie figures, and he's more than happy to give it to them. In summer 1951, one psychiatrist's report finds him an extremely sensitive boy who has not yet given up on securing some kind of love and affection from the world. Another concludes that what Charlie really needs is something to build up his self-confidence. He considers sending him to Natural Bridge Honor Camp in Virginia. This gets Charlie's attention. Natural Bridge is a minimum security facility for the most promising youths. What's more, it would make early parole much more likely. If promising can get him into a less restricted environment, well, Charlie can be as promising as he needs to be. By fall, Charlie gets his wish. His psychiatrist recommends the transfer, and on October 24th, Charlie is moved to the Virginia Honor Camp. At Natural Bridge, early release is all but assured. Charlie's parole hearing is in February 1952, and all he has to do till then is play by the honor camp's rules. But sometimes nature is just nature, and there's no getting around it. There are those who dominate, and those who get dominated, and there's not much more to life than that. When he sees the boy alone and unguarded, Charlie acts in the moment without thinking about anything but what the kid's got and what Charlie wants. Coming up behind the boy, Charlie puts a razor blade to his throat and yanks down his pants. It's over in a minute. And maybe it's time the kid learns what Charlie already knows. Rape is just a thing among things, and no more than you make of it in your head. The school authorities feel differently. Charlie's parole hearing is canceled, and he's immediately sent to the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia.
By the end of August, the teams investigating the Tate and LaBianca murders were on two separate tracks. The progress report on Tate, running 33 pages, made no reference to LaBianca. The 16-page LaBianca report said nothing of Tate. The Tate team was older, more experienced, inclined to see the case, however bizarre its elements, as still a crime among crimes. And murders were about sex or money. Since 5 individuals were involved, including the entirely unrelated Stephen Parent, it was hard to see how sex might have played a role. Yes, it was possible Sebring and Tate had reunited as lovers, pointing to Polanski as the perpetrator, with the others eliminated as witnesses. But he'd been in Europe at the time, and if he'd hired someone, he certainly could have chosen an opportunity where needless bloodshed could have been avoided. Moreover, Polanski's lie detector test indicated he'd been truthful. So, the likely motive was money. Since rumors of narcotics use at the estate abounded, detectives stayed with their theory that a drug deal was involved. Frykowski was a known drug user, and Sebring was believed to have been having financial difficulties. Perhaps separately or in concert, they had ripped off a local supplier, and this was payback to serve as a lesson to others. Despite a lack of supporting evidence, the money revenge theory maintained its hold over the Tate investigators. The LaBianca team was younger and more open to novel theories. They also were acquainted with what the report referred to as the singing group The Beatles. The band's recent album included the songs Helter Skelter and Piggies, words which had been written in the victim's blood at the crime scene. And Blackbird had repeated references to Arise, which might relate to the rise scrawled by the front door. But the connection was seen as more whimsical than substantive. It was quickly forgotten as detectives searched for more promising leads.
Charlie doesn't last a year at the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia. By August 1952, less than 8 months into his incarceration, he's committed 8 serious offenses. At 17, he might stand no more than 5'4", but he does what it takes to get what he wants. With an ability to manipulate and willingness to use violence, he's considered a danger to the other boys. In December, officials decide to transfer him to the maximum security facility in Chillicothe, Ohio. Even there, he's considered too dangerous to be placed in the general population. In a report written within a month of his arrival, Charlie is described as criminally sophisticated and grossly unsuited for an open reformatory institution such as Chillicothe. He is considered beyond rehabilitating. That's when everything changes. His chances for parole before his 21st birthday all but gone. Charlie suddenly turns himself around. He stops committing serious offenses and cooperates with officers. He takes part in the academic programs, raising his reading and arithmetic skills. He's put to work, repairing and maintaining vehicles in the institution's transportation unit. No one might have predicted it when he'd entered the facility less than 2 years earlier, But on January 1st, 1954, he receives the Meritorious Service Award from Chillicothe. On May 8th of that year, having spent 7 of his 19 years in 6 different institutions, Charles Manson is granted parole.
Here's something to chew on. Many recent studies suggest that having good oral health impacts your overall health. Yet most of us don't brush our teeth properly. You can start brushing better today. Introducing Quip, the new company that's refreshing the way people brush their teeth. Quip is an electric toothbrush that packs premium vibration and timer features into an ultra-slim design. It's been called the Apple, Warby Parker, and Tesla of toothbrushes. 75% of us don't refresh our bristles or visit the dentist on time, but Quip has subscriptions to receive new brush heads on a dentist-recommended 3-month plan for just $5, including free shipping. The best part is Quip's price tag. It starts at just $25. Save time, save money, brush better, and live healthier starting with Quip. Right now, go to getquip.com/LAcrime to get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. GETQUIP.com/LAcrime. And it'll be love at first brush. Drunk driving fatalities are 100% preventable, and it's up to you to do your part. All it takes is for one person to give a damn to save lives. Take a lift, get a ride, designate a driver. Whatever you do, care enough to get home safely whenever alcohol is involved. Your friends, family, and neighbors will all thank you for it. This is a message from Budweiser, reminding you to give a damn. Don't drive drunk. At 10 years old, Stephen Weiss had learned proper police procedure from watching Dragnet on TV. So when on September 1st he found a handgun half hidden under a bush on the hilly grounds behind his home, he knew how to avoid destroying any latent fingerprints. Gently picking the gun up by the barrel and bringing it into the house, he showed it to his father. Bernard Weiss immediately phoned the LAPD, and within minutes, Officer Michael Watson had responded to the call. Apparently not a fan of Dragnet, Officer Watson took no precautions when handling the weapon. He found 2 live rounds and 7 empty shell casings in the cylinder. The gun looked as if it had been there for a long time, rusted and caked with dirt. The barrel was loose and bent, as if from striking something hard. The right hand grip was missing. Within hours, the .22 caliber high-standard Longhorn revolver and cartridges would be taken to the Valley Services Division of LAPD in Van Nuys. They would be placed in manila envelopes and filed away in the property section under found evidence. And there they would remain.
Sitting beside his grandmother in a pew at the Nazarene church, Charlie lets the minister's words flow around him and through him in rhythmic waves. What God wants and doesn't want, mostly what he doesn't want. Free yourself of pride and self. Women, serve your men, and men your Lord. Give up your possessions and lighten your soul. The 5th angel sounded, and a star from heaven had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. Sometimes, when he closes his eyes, the syllables, empty of meaning, become cadence without content. Words are musical notes in a symphony of light and dark. And he understands, though it might not be the understanding his grandmother hopes to awaken him. There is the way of the fist, and there is the way of the word, and Charlie must learn to use them both. It was a condition of his parole that Charlie returned to McMecken, West Virginia to live with his Uncle Bill and Aunt Gemma, the closest thing to a stable family he had. But Bill was not one to forget matters like Charlie stealing his gun, and was less than convinced by his nephew's Meritorious Service Award. Might not be a bad thing for the boy to stay with his mother, recently moved to nearby Wheeling. But Kathleen still had Lewis and his drinking to deal with, and it wasn't as if Charlie got along with his stepfather any better than with his uncle. She was happy to see her son, relieved he seemed to have turned himself around, but she just wasn't in a position to offer him more than an occasional overnight stay. It was then that Nancy stepped in, still hoping to right her grandson's path. He could come stay with her most nights, providing he attend church with her every Sunday. Now, feeling him beside her in the pew, not wanting to glance over for fear of it being prideful, she knows it was the right decision. Not only might it turn his heart back toward God, he'll have the chance to socialize with people his own age. But in a world of sock hops and bake sales and kids knowing each other since they were born, it's not easy for Charlie to fit in. The kind of big talk that impressed his fellow inmates at reformatory only makes the teenagers of McMecken fearful of him. They might listen and their eyes get big when he talks about what he's stolen or who he's roughed up, or how sneaking beers and cigarettes is nothing compared to shooting drugs. But amongst themselves, they decide they want no part of him. Pretty soon, they just pass him by on the street, without so much as a word or glance. Not that life on the outside is all bad. He's got himself a job over at Wheeling Downs, the local racetrack. Cleaning stables and shoveling horse shit might not impress the sock hop kids of McMecken, but Charlie always liked animals. He can look in a horse's eyes and know where he stands. With people, you have to learn what works and what doesn't, how to lead them this way or that. He can do without his stable boss telling him what to do and when to do it. He's had enough of taking orders to last a lifetime. But when it's just him and the horses, that's okay. His mind gets clear, and human voices grow distant and fuzzy. Then one day he meets a man they call Cowboy because of the Stetson he wears and a certain way he has about him. He's a small-time gambler named Clarence Willis, and he's taken a liking to young Charlie. Enough of a liking to introduce him to his daughter Rosalie.
The broken hand grip of the pistol found at the Cielo Drive murder site was shown to Sergeant William Lee of LAPD's Firearms and Explosives Unit. Lee didn't need to check his manuals. He immediately recognized it as belonging to a high-standard .22 caliber Longhorn revolver. Ed Lomax, product manager for the company that produced the gun, hurried over to the police academy to confirm Lee's assessment, adding that it was rather a unique revolver. Only 2,700 have been produced since its introduction 2 years earlier. Lomax further accommodated police investigators by providing a photo of the gun and a list of the stores that distributed it. LAPD felt they were finally working on a significant lead. They would create a flyer with a picture and description of the Longhorn and send it out to police departments and gun shops throughout California and beyond. Some even reached remote locales in Canada. Follow-up letters were sent to any gun shop that had received an order for a replacement hand grip for the weapon. Within weeks, the majority of guns sold in California had been eliminated, and this area of investigation had reached a standstill. But just over the hill from Los Angeles, the high-standard .22 caliber Longhorn discovered by young Stephen Weiss remained in its manila envelope in a storage area of the Van Nuys division of LAPD. They had never received one of the flyers.
At 19, the only thing Charlie knows about sex is what he's learned in the dark halls and cold stalls of the reformatories where he's been incarcerated. It's about the strong and the weak. Like so much of life, you do to others, or they do to you. On the outside, he watches the polite dance people his age do. Timid glances over milkshakes at the soda fountain, hands grazing hands at the movies as if by accident. He doesn't believe it for a minute. He knows they aren't any different from him, these hulking youths with their sloppy grins. Courtship is rape by other means. The boys play the big shots and the girls make like they don't notice. Everybody's out for something and pretending they're not. At least in reformatory, everybody knew where he stood in the pecking order of want and submission. There are games Charlie plays, and games he doesn't. And he isn't about to compete with farm boys for the chance at a snatched kiss. Of course, there are the whores over in Wheeling, and that's a whole world of its own. He watches them sometimes, sitting in whatever car he can manage to hotwire. The pimps work like ministers of give and take, telling them what they need but don't know, touching their fears and then backing off, finding that inner wound and pressing just hard enough before letting up. These men in their slick suits and slicker ways know a hell of a lot more about how people operate than the psychiatrists he'd played at Chillicothe and Plainfield. Charlie learns his lessons on the streets of Wheeling, find that spot of hurt and use it. Because she's thinking, am I just this ugly thing? And do people notice it? No, you're not, darling. Not by a mile, he will say. I see the pretty inside you. And maybe he's not much to look at, maybe even a runt of a man, but he can look inside them and know just what they need. He'll tell them they're pretty when no one else will, that they're special even if they don't know it yet, that he's the one who can find what's best in them. Get a girl to believe that and she'll do anything for you. No one knows what Charlie tells Rosalie Willis, but before long, the good people of McMecken are turning their heads as the two of them walk down the street hand in hand, this nice local girl and the boy who bragged about shooting up. It's cowboy Clarence Willis who introduces Charlie to the youngest of his 3 daughters, and soon enough, they've set the date. Clucking around town supposes they have to, but if there's a baby, it's news to the couple. And on January 17th, 1955, Charlie is back in the Nazarene church. Nancy watches with pride as her grandson takes his young bride's hand to start life anew. It's more than she might have hoped for, but God knows how to surprise even the worst sinner. Clarence Willis gives consent to his 15-year-old daughter, even though she claims to be 17 on the marriage license. He liked Charlie the minute he laid eyes on him. Nancy holds the reception at her house, but her daughter isn't there. Kathleen has left Lewis again and moved to California. No one knows if Charlie misses his mother. Right now, he's enjoying his wedding cake, planning his future as a married man.
Young Charlie by Hollywood and Crime is brought to you by Rockstar Games and LA Noire, the dark detective crime thriller set among the violence, glamour, and corruption of 1940s Los Angeles. Out now for Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS4, LA Noire allows you to scour crime scenes, pick up and examine objects, interrogate witnesses, and determine who is telling the truth or lying to cover up a brutal murder. Solve crimes inspired by real cases from one of LA's most violent decades. LA Noire from Rockstar Games, out now, rated M for mature. Order now at rockstargames.com/LA Noire.
Everyone has cameras and recorders set. I am Edward Davis, Chief of Police of the City of Los Angeles.
On September 3rd, the Los Angeles Times reported that, after interviewing more than 300 persons, detectives are still without a prime suspect in the Tate murder case. LAPD's Chief of Detectives, Robert Houghton, further admitted that the longer the investigation continues, the harder it may be to solve the crime. Days earlier, LA's new police chief, Ed Davis, held a press conference answering no comment to most reporters' questions. There were, however, a few tidbits of new information. It was revealed that the weapons, the cutting weapon and a firearm, had not been found, that the killer or killers did not appear to have been wounded, and that narcotics were found in more than one part of the estate. Detective Houghton said that personally he doubted one man could have committed the crime. At his press conference, Chief Davis told reporters that his men were doing as good a job as can humanly be done. Unfortunately, the murderer or murderers did not leave calling cards. The Times article made no mention of the LaBianca killings.
The first time he picks up a guitar, Charlie can feel a new world opening up to him. The smooth wood of the neck, the curves of its body like a woman's shape. Most of all, the electric tingle passing into his fingertips from the strings every time he strums. A vibration connecting him to some universal force that goes past thinking and straight to the animal soul. There's power there, he can sense, sitting in the little room he and Rosalie have rented. The power to change him and the power to change the world. Wherever he looks now, young people seem to know something their parents don't. Music wakes you up and frees you. He listens to Frankie Lane on the radio, and the words feel more real than talking. "Answer me," croons Frankie, and it's like he's asking the sky and stars. Charlie teaches himself some chords, and when he opens his mouth to imitate Frankie, his voice surprises him. Like it's not really coming from him, but tapping into the same force as Frankie's, a force that connects everything to everything. He has things to say. He feels for the first time in his life, and there are people who will listen. Music is different from earthly things, the comings and goings of men. Like the words of the Nazarene minister becoming more than just words. He remembers feeling it even when he was sitting at Aunt Glenna's piano, little legs dangling off the bench, tiny fingers pressing on those keys, and him closing his eyes and these sounds wafting up toward the heaven that Grandmother Nancy believed was real, and he had no opinion about.
Facing murder charges in the death of music teacher Gary Hinman, Bobby Beausoleil received his trial date on September 4th. Bobby had been in jail for about a month since the Fiat station wagon he'd been driving had broken down outside San Luis Obispo. 2 highway patrolmen had pulled up, and when they checked the license plates, they discovered the car was registered to the Topanga Canyon murder victim. A quick examination of the Fiat turned up a bloody knife hidden in the wheel well. Bobby was arrested, and the LA County Sheriff's Department was notified. Detectives Paul Whiteley and Charles Gunther, working on the Hinman investigation, drove up to interview the prisoner. Bobby told them he'd recently purchased the car from a black guy. When the detectives informed him that his fingerprints matched a bloody thumbprint found at the scene of the crime, he changed his story. Now he claimed that Hinman had signed over the car to 2 girls he knew. Whiteley and Gunther had Beausoleil brought back to the LA County Jail and booked for the murder of Gary Hinman. His trial date was set for November 12th. As Bobby sat in jail, detectives Whiteley and Gunther were looking for his pregnant girlfriend, Kitty Lutzinger, a possible witness to the crime. But Kitty was nowhere to be found.
Los Angeles is something you feel long before you see it. Like tentacles of some biblical beast, its roads and freeways reach into the desert, the mountains, all the way to the sea. However he might have imagined it back in tiny McMecken, LA is overpowering in its speed and complexity. Rosalie sits in the passenger seat, looking out with wide eyes. Charlie doesn't say a word for miles, lets the motion of the cars, a fury of color and light, wash over him. By the time they arrive at Kathleen's modest apartment, Charlie knows that Los Angeles is the home he never knew he missed till he got here. It isn't that he didn't give it a try in McMecken. He kept his job at Wheeling Downs, taking odd work where he could find it. There was even this tug he could feel pulling him toward a conventional life. He felt something prideful in the way he was looked at, maybe even respected, in that way that you're respected just for not standing out. But by spring 1955, Rosalie was pregnant. And with doctor bills adding to the burden of his small family, Charlie began supplementing his income by stealing cars just across the river in Ohio. You do what you do for family. When summer rolled around, Charlie was more than ready for a change from McMecken. He piled Rosalie into a stolen '53 Mercury, and they headed west to visit Kathleen. They were going to California. Kathleen is glad to see Charlie and his pregnant bride, happy to let the young couple stay with her. With Louis not around to get between her and her son, things are all right. Charlie seems alive in Los Angeles, driving the streets, taking it all in. There is little about LA that doesn't surprise or startle. He tools around in that Mercury and lets the city fill him like a meal he can't get up from. He understands now what people mean when they talk about destiny, something beyond the here and now. It's not so much that Charlie doesn't think about the future. It's more that it never occurred to him that he had one. Now, he feels the pull of the future. LA is the destiny he never knew he had.
A month after the death of his wife, Roman Polanski and several of his friends decided it was time to play a more active role in the investigation. On September 10th, they took out large ads in Los Angeles area newspapers, offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the killer or killers. Hollywood stalwarts, including Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, and Yul Brynner, contributed to the effort, with Sellers making the announcement. Rather than the desired effect, the ad only created further problems for police investigating the crimes. Within days, tips were pouring in from around the city, overwhelming detectives and potentially obscuring legitimate information that might have come in. Theories abounded, from a mafia hit to bizarre drug-fueled sex practices gone awry. Hollywood players and peripherals seemed eager to turn on each other, providing accusatory information on whomever they were feuding with that week. Beyond the muddying effect of this deluge, the implication of the Polanski ad was not lost on LAPD investigators. They were not doing their job.
It's not until September that Charlie is once again reminded that destiny is something that controls you if you don't control it. He's driving through Pasadena when he's pulled over by an LA policeman who notices the out-of-state plates. A quick check reveals the car is stolen. Charlie throws himself on the mercy of the court, blaming his poor mental state on years of incarceration. He even admits to stealing another car back in Ohio and unloading it in Florida, another violation of the Dyer Act. But he's got a wife now with a kid on the way. Maybe he hasn't been the best citizen. But how would prison help that? The judge orders a psychiatric evaluation, and Dr. Edwin McNeil concludes that, with the incentive of a wife and fatherhood, it's possible he might be able to straighten himself out. The judge sentences Charlie to 5 years probation. He's still got the Dyer Act charges to deal with, and he's ordered to be back in court in February 1956. Although it's unlikely to do more than add a few years to his probation, Charlie and Rosalie flee to Indianapolis. On March 10th, Rosalie gives birth to Charles Manson Jr. A week later, Charlie is arrested and brought back to Los Angeles. His probation is revoked, and for the first time, he's sentenced as an adult. Charlie is given 3 years at the Terminal Island Penitentiary at San Pedro, in the Port of Los Angeles.
Some 6 weeks after the murders, Los Angeles was a changed place. The universe of the Hollywood establishment turned upside down. Frank Sinatra was in hiding. Rosemary's Baby star Mia Farrow was convinced that she would be next. Steve McQueen drove around town with a gun under the seat of his car. Tony Bennett left his Beverly Hills hotel bungalow for an apartment in the hotel's safer interior. Jerry Lewis's home was equipped with a security system replete with video monitoring. Esquire would report that, in the great houses of Bel Air, terror sends people flying to their telephones when a branch falls from a tree outside.
Yes, we examined the 5 bodies.
On September 19th, LA County Coroner Thomas Noguchi called a press conference that did little to assuage residents' fears. He was now convinced that 2, possibly 3 killers had been responsible for the slaughter at Cielo Drive. Elements of the crime suggested the severe psychopathy of at least one of the killers. It was possible drugs had played a role. There was little in his report that was unexpected or comforting, and little hint that the LAPD was any closer to solving the crime. Next time on Young Charlie, how to win friends and influence people. Back in the penitentiary in 1957, Charlie studies Dale Carnegie's popular self-help book and L. Ron Hubbard's teachings about Scientology. Charlie will use what he's learned from them and his fellow inmates to become a more successful pimp. This is Hollywood and Crime from Wondery. Subscribe to Hollywood and Crime on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. To find out more information, read our episode notes and contact us if you have any questions or comments. If you like what you've heard, we'd love you to give us a 5-star rating and review us. And be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. Young Charlie is written and directed by Larry Brand. Hollywood and Crime is created and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, John Ponder, and Tracy Pattin, and produced by Jim Carpenter. Young Charlie was recorded at The Invisible Studios, West Hollywood, California, and Blue Room Post in Manhattan Beach, California. Executive producers Ben Adair and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.